Eleanor slid the pile of divorce papers and a fountain pen across the table toward Callum, her diamond-covered fingers gleaming as coldly as the glass towers of Canary Wharf. That night, Callum had just returned from 3 exhausting weeks on the North Sea wind turbine platforms, his clothes still carrying the smell of oil and salt, his hands rough and scarred from relentless work. Eleanor stood before him in a custom-made silk dress worth £5,000, staring at her husband of 8 years with open disdain, as though he were dirt on her polished floor. In a voice stripped of all warmth, she announced that she no longer needed him, declaring that a grease-stained operations engineer only tarnished the image of a powerful female CEO who had just reached a 6-figure income. For 8 long years, Callum had braved level 10 storms at sea, risking his life to earn every pound that paid for Eleanor's MBA and the £4 million Chelsea penthouse. He had willingly remained in the shadows, becoming the silent foundation that allowed her to shine in London's financial spotlight, only for her to now see his sacrifice as proof of his inferiority. Eleanor believed he was nothing more than a lucky manual worker, married far above his station, completely unaware that the man seated across from her was the very senior consultant her own company paid hundreds of thousands of pounds a year for guidance on energy infrastructure. Callum lowered his gaze to the divorce papers, then lifted it to the woman he had once loved beyond measure. He didn't shout, nor did he reveal million-pound contracts or his true status to cling to a heart consumed by ambition. His breathing slowed, deep and steady like the ocean's depths. He picked up the fountain pen, its cold weight heavy in his hand. Eleanor crossed her arms, chin lifted, expecting tears or desperate pleas, but instead, Callum signed with firm resolve. The scratch of the pen across the paper echoed in the stillness, each stroke officially ending 8 years of marriage. When the final page was signed, Callum rose, his posture strong and unshakable like steel against crashing waves. He took nothing from the luxurious apartment, laying no claim to the wealth his own labor had helped create. Silently, he gathered his toolbox and left with only a single bag. A flicker of unease crossed Eleanor's face at his calmness, and she asked where he planned to go at 1 a.m. through London's heavy fog. Callum paused at the doorway without turning around, his voice quiet yet firm with newfound freedom, telling her that from now on, she would never again have to worry about being weighed down by an unworthy husband. The door slammed shut, a sharp sound sealing the collapse of a marriage born of betrayal. Callum stepped into the icy January night, the cold air filling his lungs with clarity. He started his old Land Rover Defender, the engine's growl cutting through the silence, and drove across Westminster Bridge, watching the Thames glide beneath him as he headed north toward the Lake District, where the wind farms awaited. High above on the 32nd floor of the Chelsea Tower, Eleanor stood alone by the window, a glass of expensive red wine in hand, a strange chill creeping through her body. She had everything: status, wealth, and independence. Yet the triumph felt like a void swallowing her whole. She didn't realize that when Callum walked away, he took with him the unseen shield that had protected her for years. Callum pressed harder on the accelerator, the speed climbing toward 80 miles per hour as the motorway lights blurred behind him like broken memories. He was no longer the silent, self-sacrificing husband of a cold-hearted CEO. He was a master of storms, fully aware that after the fiercest gales, a radiant dawn always waits beyond the horizon. His new life was beginning where sea meets land, where real worth is never exchanged for the empty shine of a business card. A 7-hour journey through the heavy darkness of the northern motorway brought Callum to the coastal town of Morecambe just as the first light of dawn sliced through the mist hovering over Lake Windermere. Instead of choosing a luxury hotel, he stopped before a small, weathered stone cottage standing alone on a windswept hill, its ancient walls carpeted with centuries of green moss. This house was the single possession he had kept hidden from Eleanor throughout their 8 years together. A refuge he had once imagined as their future retirement home, but which now became the first fortress of a man rising anew from the ashes of betrayal. Callum began this new chapter by discarding the expensive suits he had worn to satisfy Eleanor at endless London social gatherings, replacing them with rugged blue work clothes typical of the energy industry. For the first 2 weeks, he devoted himself entirely to repairing the cottage's heating and electrical systems, using the master craftsmanship he had honed over decades. Every hammer strike against metal and stone, every wire carefully reconnected, felt like therapy for a soul scarred by heartbreak. He no longer woke up anxious over his wife's financial charts or corporate battles in Canary Wharf. Instead, he greeted mornings to the sound of waves and wind whispering through stone cracks like a song of freedom. At the largest renewable energy facility in northwest England, Callum arrived as nothing more than a regular maintenance worker. Yet within 3 days, the entire technical crew was stunned by his true expertise. When wind turbine number 42 suffered a major failure that specialists from London couldn't resolve for a full day, Callum calmly climbed 150 meters into the cold Lake District drizzle. After just 15 minutes of inspection, he pinpointed a software malfunction in the central control system and fixed it with a few precise adjustments to the circuitry. None of them knew that the oil-stained man atop the tower was the inventor behind 12 global green energy patents. A consultant multinational firms paid thousands of pounds an hour to advise. Callum moved through the plant like a quiet, steady force, declining every flashy promotion so he could focus on perfecting the machinery. His real freedom didn't come from the steadily growing numbers in his bank account, but from no longer forcing himself into the social mold Eleanor had built. In the evenings, he often relaxed at the local pub with his brother George, the only person who truly understood the sacrifices Callum had made to support an ungrateful wife's ambitions. George watched with pride, seeing that after years of suppression, Callum's strength and brilliance were finally emerging more powerful than ever. One stormy evening in Cumbria, Callum spotted an old car steaming by the roadside near the lake. A young woman with auburn hair stood helplessly in the rain, worry written on her face, yet softened by a warmth Eleanor had never possessed. This was Sarah, the town's primary school teacher, struggling to shield her lesson plans from the downpour. Without hesitation, Callum pulled over his Land Rover Defender, stepped into the rain, and repaired the leaking radiator in just 5 minutes with expert skill. When Sarah timidly offered to pay him, he smiled and declined. A sincere, peaceful smile he hadn't worn in years among Chelsea's cold glass towers. That brief encounter marked the beginning of a new emotional chapter for Callum, showing him that the world still held people who valued kindness without calculating profit. Sarah admired his capable hands and generous heart, qualities Eleanor had once dismissed as ordinary and insignificant. As Callum quietly built a tranquil life in northern England, he severed all ties with his former world, erasing every trail so no one could track him down. He had no idea that back in London, Eleanor was beginning to feel her stability crumble as the appliances in her Chelsea penthouse failed one by one, with no one left who could fix them as perfectly as he once had, leaving a vast emptiness inside her luxurious glass prison. The £4 million penthouse in Chelsea was no longer a trophy of success, but had turned into a cold, lifeless glass tomb for Eleanor. She stood in the center of the enormous living space, London's glittering skyline stretching beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, while inside reigned a silence so deep she could hear the clock ticking against the marble wall. The CEO title and 6-figure income she had once chased so desperately were now nothing more than hollow figures glowing on a phone screen, incapable of warming the room that felt increasingly frozen. The independence she had exchanged her entire 8-year marriage for was beginning to turn against her in the harshest way possible. The unraveling started one night when the luxury smart home system Eleanor used to brag about suddenly shut down completely as the temperature in London fell below -2 degrees Celsius. She summoned 3 elite electrical service teams from across the city who spent 10 hours struggling with intricate wiring before leaving with a bill exceeding £2,000, yet the stone floors remained ice cold. Shivering in her opulent home, Eleanor instinctively thought of Callum. She remembered how, for 8 years, she had never once felt the chill. The moment anything went wrong, he would grab his toolbox and fix it within minutes with his rough but capable hands, never complaining, never asking for praise. The independence Eleanor had always glorified now revealed deep fractures as she realized she barely understood how life around her actually worked. Confusing tax documents piled up, the security system malfunctioned, and even the balcony's hanging garden began to die because she didn't know how to operate the automated irrigation setup Callum had personally designed. Desperate to escape the growing sense of helplessness, she immersed herself in glamorous Mayfair dinner parties, searching for belonging among the upper class. There she met Marcus, a smooth investment fund manager whose confidence mirrored her own. Eleanor believed he fit perfectly into her new world. Until, during a meal at a 3-Michelin-star restaurant, Marcus delivered a brutal lesson about hierarchy. With a cold, assessing stare, he remarked that successful women like her were simply high-value assets, only worth keeping close as long as they enhanced image or profit. It struck Eleanor with painful clarity that Marcus was treating her exactly as she had treated Callum, like a tool for social gain. Humiliation and fury drove her to seek Callum again, either to reassert control or at least to have him fix the chaos she was drowning in. In desperation, she called the port operations office, where he had once worked, fabricating a family emergency to force information out of them. The reply shattered her arrogance like icy water. A senior official from the National Infrastructure Security Department informed her sternly that they were unable to disclose anything about Callum, who was now classified as top-level strategic personnel within the North Sea energy sector. One by one, the layers hiding Callum's true stature were stripped away, leaving Eleanor in stunned disbelief. The man she had once dismissed as a grease-stained engineer was in fact a central figure, safeguarding the operations of an entire North Sea energy system, someone whose quiet authority dwarfed her hollow executive title. Callum had not vanished out of weakness. He had simply finished protecting someone no longer deserving of that devotion. Eleanor finally understood that every promotion she'd earned, every stable year that allowed her to chase ambition, had existed because a powerful presence had silently handled every crisis behind the scenes. The more she searched for him, the deeper Eleanor sank into loneliness. The flawless, independent woman photos she posted online, captioned with words about living her best life, were nothing but fragile masks hiding her inner collapse. She worked 70 hours a week, only to return to a vast, echoing apartment devoid of laughter, warmth, or a man waiting with a cup of tea after exhausting days. The CEO title that once made her glow now felt like a tightening crown of thorns, squeezing her mind every night as darkness settled in. The smartphone lying on the oak table suddenly buzzed for the 50th time that morning, tearing apart the peaceful quiet of the small cottage beside Lake Windermere. Callum remained seated, his calm hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea, silently watching the screen light up with a sequence of numbers both unfamiliar and painfully recognizable. For the past 3 weeks, ever since Eleanor had uncovered his new contact through a loophole in medical insurance files, an onslaught of digital chaos had begun. It wasn't just endless calls, but nearly 200 voice messages stacked one after another, each one a piece of a spirit slowly collapsing under the weight of late regret. The independence Eleanor once glorified had transformed into a frightening fixation. Back in London, the commanding control of a powerful CEO had completely slipped from her grasp. The financial statements that once defined her days now sat untouched, replaced by detailed maps of Cumbria and reports from private detectives. She had spent £15,000 simply to locate the man she had once cast aside so coldly. The thought that Callum was living peacefully and successfully without her was unbearable. Knowing he was rising swiftly in the energy sector and sharing a warm life with Sarah sliced into her pride like a knife every day. One foggy morning, Callum chose to sit beside Sarah and listen to the messages, not out of longing, but to finally put the shadow of the past to rest. He put the phone on speaker, and Eleanor's voice filled the room, thick with despair. The first 10 recordings were sharp and commanding, ordering him back to London to deal with the apartment issues. By the 50th message, her tone wavered, admitting she had been wrong to look down on his career. By the 100th, she had completely fallen apart, sobbing in the middle of the night, confessing she had stepped down as CEO because she could no longer concentrate on work, and that she had sold the Chelsea flat because every room reminded her of the love he once gave her. Sarah tightened her grip on Callum's hand as they reached the 150th message, where Eleanor began speaking about moving north to find him. Her voice, thick with alcohol, rambled about hiring a life coach to learn how to be vulnerable, anything to win him back. Her obsession grew darker as she started attacking his new profession. She had phoned the energy plant's main line dozens of times, pretending there was a life or death emergency just to hear his voice. This was no longer affection. It was guilt-driven desperation, a frantic attempt to reclaim a bond she herself had ended 8 years earlier. The emotional climax came with the 200th message at 4 a.m. Eleanor said she was standing on Westminster Bridge, the same place where Callum had once thrown away his SIM card, and that she had hurled her 50,000-pound diamond ring into the Thames to prove wealth meant nothing to her anymore. She screamed into the phone that he had no right to find happiness while she suffered, insisting he owed her a face-to-face meeting after 8 years of marriage. When the message ended, Callum's face remained as cold as ice from the North Sea. He felt no triumph in her collapse, only sorrow for someone who had traded her soul for vanity, and now, with that vanity gone, tried to steal back peace from another. Callum turned off the phone and looked through the window where Sarah was smiling as she planted fresh lavender in the garden. The real twist was not Eleanor losing everything, but Callum realizing that his true strength had never been in patents or prestigious titles. It was in owning his own future. He chose to answer none of the 200 messages. To him, Eleanor was now a stranger trying to break into the happiness he had carefully built. He knew that a single reply would become a spark she'd use to keep haunting his and Sarah's lives. That evening, a sleek black BMW with London plates quietly rolled into the parking lot of the coastal town of Morecambe. Eleanor stepped out, her hollow face stripped of any trace of her former authority. She had given up her career, her home, and her status to make the 12-hour drive through the storm. Beneath the soft yellow streetlights, she stared toward the hill where the lights of Callum's cottage still glowed warmly. What she didn't know was that inside that house, Callum had already reached a final decision on her pride and persistence. The storm raging across northern England was pierced by the relentless ringing of the doorbell, breaking the calm of the stone house by the lake. Callum rose from his seat, softly resting a hand on Sarah's shoulder in quiet reassurance before moving toward the entrance. When the heavy wooden door opened, a surge of freezing wind mixed with rain lashed against his face. Standing beneath the faint yellow porch light was Eleanor. Once the commanding presence atop a London financial empire, she now resembled a lost soul wandering through the downpour. Her costly designer outfit hung wet and disheveled, and her perfectly styled hair was plastered to her hollow, pale cheeks. The sharp confidence that once burned in her eyes had vanished, replaced by deep wells of weariness and desperation. With a shaky voice, Eleanor explained that she had driven non-stop for 12 hours, sold her apartment, and abandoned everything to come there. She dropped to her knees on the icy stone steps, gripping the edge of Callum's coat as though he were her last hope in a sea of despair. Through sobs, she admitted that casting aside the one man who truly loved her for an empty title had been the biggest mistake of her life. Callum gazed down at her, feeling no pain or anger anymore, only a distant chill, like Lake Windermere in winter. Calmly, he replied that she had not made a mistake at all. She had merely acted according to her true nature that night 4 years earlier, choosing ambition over love and stepping on affection to reach the heights of fame. The moment intensified when Callum revealed a truth Eleanor had never imagined. He told her that shortly after she resigned, the financial firm had secretly reached out to him, urgently asking him to step in as a strategic consultant to save the infrastructure projects that her incompetence had brought to a standstill. The real authority had never belonged to her. It rested with people like him, those who controlled the essential workings rather than the glittering facade. Horror washed over Eleanor as she realized that even at what she believed was her peak, she had been nothing more than a pawn in a game whose rules Callum understood far better than she ever had. Just then, Sarah stepped outside and took her place beside Callum. She didn't need to speak. Her presence, wrapped in a warm wool sweater, eyes filled with kindness, was the final blow to Eleanor's shattered pride. Eleanor stared at Sarah, a woman without luxury brands or impressive titles, yet the one who possessed what Eleanor had lost forever, Callum's love and respect. Callum looked at his former wife for the last time and said that he had forgiven her the day he signed the divorce papers. But forgiveness did not mean welcoming her back into his life. He stated firmly that he was not a backup plan for her to return to when her glamorous world fell apart. The encounter ended as Callum slowly and firmly pried Eleanor's fingers from his coat. He advised her to use what money she had left to seek therapy and learn how to live with the consequences of her decisions. The wooden door shut once again, solid and final, like a verdict sealing Eleanor's loneliness. She remained in the storm, watching the silhouettes of Callum and Sarah blur behind the gold-lit window. The black BMW turned away, its headlights sweeping over the ancient oak trees before vanishing into the heavy Cumbria rain, carrying with it the late regrets of a queen who had destroyed her own throne. The following morning, after the storm had cleared and Lake Windermere lay smooth as glass, Callum stood on the balcony inhaling the fresh, earthy air. A profound sense of freedom filled him. Peace no amount of wealth could ever purchase. He had passed through betrayal's darkness to reach the light of true worth. From that day forward, his life would no longer be shadowed by manipulation or emotional chains. He held Sarah's hand, certain that this sanctuary was where he truly belonged. Beyond them, the wind turbines continued to spin, powering the world, just as Callum had transformed pain into strength for his new beginning. Callum and Eleanor's story stands as a powerful lesson about karma and the true meaning of sincerity. Success is not defined by the height of the building you occupy, but by the depth of love you share with those beside you. Callum chose integrity and ability over glitter and status, and his reward was a bright future with someone who valued his real worth. Eleanor learned the hardest truth of all. Once you burn the bridge to someone's heart, no amount of riches can ever rebuild it. What are your thoughts on Eleanor's ending? Was Callum's firm choice too harsh, or was it the justice he deserved after all he endured? Share your opinions in the comments so we can reflect together on appreciation in marriage. If this story moved and inspired you, remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful stories ahead. Your support means everything to us. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.